anybody that sees what's true, anybody that's aware of what's going on, has an experience of how much energy is being wasted. And the amount of energy that's being wasted, I mean, if you just consider that it's not just about thinking, but the fallout from the thinking is tension in the body, right? Because the thinking is thinking being done by a separate self. And once the separate self reality is in place, then threat exists, and therefore there's fear. And the way the body operates in relationship to that is the fight, flight, or freeze process that the system uses to survive, right? And part of that process is to send blood to the muscles because you have to fight or run, right? And so the system is constantly on a state of alert. The system is constantly on a state of alert, meaning that the body is constantly held in a state of tension, right? The body is, when we go to practice meditation, if you just pay attention to the fact, if I say to you, let your shoulders drop, right? Yeah, if you any time that you bring attention to the body and the shoulders, and you'll notice that you're holding your shoulders up, right? You actually, if you really pay attention to the body, you're actually holding your body. You're not letting your body be supported by the earth. You're holding your body all the time, like getting ready to run, right? So the system is constantly on alert for threats to the survival of the body and the survival of the person. And that's burning energy all the time. It's burning energy all the time. And that's a tremendous waste of energy because most of the time there's no threat, right? So you're constantly on, and that's the reason that a lot of the issues occur in the physical body, like migraine headaches. Headaches are constrictions of the vessels and the capillaries, right? It's a constriction, yeah? And so that produces a headache. The same thing is true with other areas of the body, that because of the contraction that's there, which affects the functioning of the body and the heart and the flow of the blood and the whole 9 yards, right? That puts the body in a state of dis-ease, uneasy all the time, right? And then that state of dis-ease manifests itself in specific ailments and specific physical problems depending upon the unique body of that particular person. And so people are in a constant state of tension all the time, a constant state of concern all the time. That's one of the things that if you start to pay attention to the reality of your experience, if you start looking at your experience, right, one of the things that's not that hard to see is you're concerned, aren't you? You're always concerned. In your dreams you're concerned. So we live in this state of concern, right? But going back to what I was saying earlier when we were talking about these questions, right? The key to the answer of the questions and the key to experiencing the possibility, right, of freedom and the possibility of well-being and the possibility of being relaxed, right, is to recognize that the mistake that's in the system, until that mistake that's in the system is corrected, right, that will continue, because all of that is a function of thinking of yourself as a separate self, of thinking yourself as a physical body. Once you think of yourself as a separate self and think of yourself as a separate body, and you're living in a world where that's the reality that you're in, and everybody else is thinking of themselves as a separate self and a separate body, right? Then the concerns arise, and they're legitimate concerns, because if this is the truth and this is all there is, you have a lot to be concerned about. Right, because you are threatened. Because life is unpredictable, because people are crazy, right? And so there is reason to be concerned if that is true, if that reality is the case, right? And there's so much consensus, there's so much agreement that that reality is the case, that that's the world we're living in. There's so much agreement that that's real and that is the way it is, that that's the world we're living in. And once you're in that world, everything that comes along with being in that world is there. You know, experiencing yourself as separate, being part of this limited reality in which it appears that the way to experience satisfaction, well-being, happiness, contentment, and so forth is to operate in the game with the way the game is played, like Monopoly, right? You're a piece on the Monopoly board, now you're playing the game. How's the game played? Well, the game's played by acquiring more, right? Yeah. So life is just like Monopoly. You know, once your piece is on the board, then there's the game and the game gets played, and that's the end of it, right? So the traditions and the practices are telling us, okay, all right, but that is not reality, and the key to seeing that to be the case is to understand that there is no such thing as a separate self. There's no such thing as the person that you think you are that inhabits a physical body. And what the teachings and the practices tell us is don't believe that. The Buddha said, do not believe me. Do not accept what I'm saying. Right? Because believing me and accepting what I'm saying won't produce a result. You'll have interesting beliefs. You know, you can talk good at a party, but you're still miserable. Right? So what good is that, right? What good is to have a conceptual understanding of reality, an academic understanding of reality that doesn't make any difference in terms of what it's like to be you, right? The seeker, you know, when you come to this class, what's the attraction? The attraction in the very beginning is the concepts are interesting. The concepts are present you with something that you become interested in the possibility of having the experience that these concepts speak of. Right? But to understand the concepts is not going to provide that experience. This is why the teaching and the teachers keep bringing it back and saying, meditate, practice meditation. Find out, for example, when you ask questions like the one you asked, right? A teacher would say, Ramana Maharshi would say, and he did say to people that ask questions like that, who's asking? Find out who's asking. If you find out who's asking, your questions will be answered. If you find out who's asking, there won't be any questions. Because in order for there to be a question, you have to identify yourself as a separate self. Without that, that's why I said what I said earlier. If you take that out of the equation, how can there be a question? If you're everything all the time, if you are experience instead of having an experience, how can there be a question? Because any possible question and any possible answer is there. It's all there. There's nothing outside of it. Right? To the separate self and the individual being, the individual person, that doesn't resolve anything, that doesn't satisfy anything, because if you really face the truth, if you really look at what you're asking how can I experience after death? That's what you're asking, aren't you? Yeah, you're asking how can I experience after death, right? But if you take that I out of the question, right, that if you remove that I out of the question, how could there be a question? If there's nobody to experience what the experience is after death, and if the only thing that's there after death is an experience itself without somebody having an experience, it's completed in itself. The fulfillment is there. Everything that's possible is being experienced at the same time. It's very difficult to conceive of that from an individual point of view. It's very difficult to conceive of that given that your identification and your orientation is so much in the idea that you're a physical body. And that's why the teachings say what they say, you know. Find out what the answer to the question is. How do you find out, right? Practice meditation and then notice the experience that meditation is providing you. Because if you practice meditation the way it's meant to be done, you're practicing experiencing that you don't exist the way you think you do. as an experience. You're practicing experiencing that you don't exist as you think you do. As an experience, that's the case. So it's no longer a conceptual understanding. People have this experience without any conceptual understanding. And there are a lot of people that have an awakening experience, that have an enlightenment experience, and they wouldn't even think to talk about it as something unusual, because it's not something unusual for somebody that has the experience. It's something that's ordinary. And one of the things that they say to people who claim, now watch, one of the things that they say to people who claim they're not having the experience is that you are having the experience. You are the awareness right now when you're claiming you're not. How do you know? Because you're here. That's how you know. And the shift that takes place from the idea that you're the subject and everything that's not you is the object, right? The thing that takes place when you're the subject and everything is the object is that the shift occurs in which you recognize the experience of awareness has always been here. One of the things that people say who have an awakening is they say, "What, this? You mean this? Are you talking about this? This? Yeah, this. You're aware. I'm talking about the awareness that you're experiencing right now. Oh, that. Oh, that's always been here. That's you mean that's it? That's it? That's what I am? That's the answer? Yeah, that's the answer. Oh, wow. How did I miss that? Right? So that you understand that the quality of your life is a function of your existence, not what's happening. Do you understand? The quality of your life is a function of the fact that you're here, not what's happening. The experience of what's happening and the experience of the awareness that appears in, right? Because it's not substantial, it's not actual, right? So the experience of what's happening and the awareness of that experience that appears in the awareness is the party, is the show, is the human life. And if you start to get clear through the direct experience of meditation that there's no threat and there's nothing at risk and nothing's going to happen to you, nothing can happen to you, then you can sit back and enjoy the show, just like the movies. The movies are a very interesting metaphor because it's actually a very accurate metaphor of what it's like to be awake and aware and know the truth, right? Because what happens, you go to the movies, you sit there in the movies, and the thing that's really interesting about it is you sit there in the movies, and the thing that sells the tickets and gets people to come to the movies is how dramatic the movie is. How dramatic it is, how much death is in it, right? Not only how much death, how many people die, thousands die, right? And all the creative ways of dying get presented to you in the movie. But you can sit there relaxed and enjoy watching human life is what you're watching. When you look at the movies, you're watching human life. You're sitting there enjoying watching human life. And that human life that you're watching involves drama, desperation, fear, anger, murder, right? That's what you watch in the movies. That's what sells the tickets. If you went to the movies and all the movies were happy people enjoying themselves, you stop going. So all we're talking about here is that if you continue to do the practice, if you continue to do the practice of meditation, and you continue to study these teachings, right? You're coming into reality. You're coming into reality through that process. And meditation is the heart of the matter when it comes to that process, because meditation is the experience of the truth, not a conceptual understanding of the truth. And the truth is an experience. It's not a conceptual understanding. And that's why they say, for teachers who teach in the non-dual tradition, right, that they're pointing to things. They're not saying that's it, right? They're using the concepts to point to what is it, but what it is that they're pointing to is non-conceptual. What it is that they're pointing to is only possible as an experience, and the experience that they're pointing to is one that's being had, the experience that's being experienced where you are. But the experience that you're experiencing where you are is not being had by a person. that it's inevitable that being in this reality, that's where you start from, and therefore that has to be the route that you take. The route that you took being here was that you became interested in something that looked like an answer. You know, you became interested in something that looked like something that could resolve or solve your problems. Resolve or solve your misery, resolve or solve your anxiety, resolve or solve your depression, resolve or solve your dysfunction in your relationships in life. That was the attraction, right? Not a problem, that's a good thing, right? But as they say in the teachings and the practices in relationship to the masters and the awakened ones, right? That'll take you so far, right? That'll take you so far. And then you have to let go of that. You have to let go of that. That's why they have koans in a lot of the Zen practices. A koan is a riddle that you can't solve through thinking, right? So you could think your way up to a certain point, but at some point you have to let go of thinking. You have to let go of thinking. You have to allow yourself to experience itself, right? Non-conceptual experience itself, which can't be spoken of, right? So that becomes the problem. So then the teacher says to the student, okay, I'm going to give you some questions to answer, and your answer to the questions will give me a sense of whether you see what I'm pointing at, right? So they have questions like, one of the famous Zen koans is, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? And the student gets the question, and then they come back and meet with the teacher, and they give the answers to the teacher, and the teacher then either gives them a pass or a fail on their answer, right? Usually it's a fail for a long time. Because the idea is to get you to see beyond concept, right? So the answer to the question may seem to not make sense to somebody who doesn't understand, but the listener to the answer isn't looking for a logical answer. They're not looking for a rational answer. They're looking for an answer that indicates that the person's experiencing what was being pointed at. Not like a logical answer, right? That the person's experiencing what's being pointed at, and so that's the process of using these koans. The koans are designed to frustrate you out of trying to understand the truth through thinking, because you can't understand the truth through thinking because it's not conceptual. But it's possible to experience it, and when you're experiencing it, it's possible for you to express that experience in such a way that the teacher knows that you had that experience, and then you've answered the koan. Yeah, so the most important thing is that you can use the practice of contemplation and the practice of meditation as a way of having a direct experience of what the koans are pointing to. And it's always available, and it's always possible. One of the things that I want to, bring out here and ask you to consider is that meditation, the formal practice of meditation, is intended to be the beginning of your discovering a way of being in the world that you can then practice in your life. Meditation is a formal practice of discovering a way of being that through that experience of that way of being, you can begin to practice that way of being in your life. Therefore, if you only practice formal meditation and in your ordinary everyday life, right, that's not showing up anywhere, you're still crazy after all these years, right? If that's the case, then the meditation there's something wrong in the meditation process, the experience of the meditation. Because if you're practicing meditation the way it's meant to be done, it will naturally start to flow into your regular life. You will start to connect the dots. You will start to see, oh, this isn't just about sitting cross-legged and, following my breath. No, this is about learning how to be present so that I can experience being present in my ordinary life in a way that has me stop being so crazy, that has me stop believing that I think my thoughts, that has me stop believing that I feel my feelings, that has me stop believing that there is anyone here that needs to have questions answered. So that's the thing that keeps coming back to, when I listen to my friend up in Ithaca, he gives his talks on Sunday mornings, and he's been teaching meditation and Zen. And Zen is simply saying the truth, talking about the Dharma, the teaching of the truth. He's been practicing that for 45 years, right? And yet, after 45 years, if you listen to his talks, and I hope some of you do, right? He says the same thing every time. Every time without fail, he says, try and find who you think you are as an actual reality. Try and find it. Try and find it in your body. Try and find there is nothing in here listening to what's coming through these ears. There's nothing in here watching what's coming through these eyes, right? There is no person here. You can't find any person here in this physical body, right? However, there is an awareness that's aware of what's happening, what's coming through these ears and what's coming through these eyes. It's not located in a physical body. The body is located in it. This is experientially possible, and so these teachings have to do with, okay, you think whatever you think, but now take a look at the experience and see what the experience says, because the experience is a direct relationship with reality. What you think is an interpretation of reality. So let's spend some time with the direct experience. Learn from that. What does that teach us about reality, right? And so when you're practicing meditation, what does that teach you about reality, right? It's a direct experience of the truth, which is that you're the awareness of the body breathing. You're the awareness that has always been there. The awareness has always been there in your life, always been there, mostly ignored. That's called ignorance. So now we're saying, stop ignoring it. Stop ignoring the awareness. Pay attention to the awareness. And when you pay attention to the awareness, you'll start to experience the experience of that being you. You'll start to experience the experience of that being you. And then you'll know that just like the space in this room, you have never been burdened by the limited experiences that occur for a human being through thinking. You've never been limited by that. And you can have that occur. You can be the awareness of that occurring like the person sitting in the audience watching a movie and be no more affected than that person watching the movie. Right? But only if you do what it takes to get this rewired. If you don't get this rewired, you can be aware of the truth and have the effect of this stop happening, right? The effect of your emotions and the effect of your thinking, because once you're clear about the truth that there's nobody thinking the thoughts and there's nobody there for anything to happen to, right? The way you then perceive the thoughts and the emotions becomes completely transformed, transcended, totally different. So you can experience that, and once you experience that, the programming will still continue to run. That was put there through conditioning. And the conditioning is the conditioning that you're a physical body, you're a separate person, right? That'll continue to run, right? But now, if you've established conceptually and partially experientially, right, the truth of yourself as awareness, now that's there watching this. That's there watching this. See, before that was there watching this, you were imagining that that which is watching this was a product of this. In other words, me, the person, is aware, right? Instead of the awareness being aware of me, no, I am aware, right? And that's the mistake, right? Because that's not the case. Once you have it that you're aware as a person, you've cut yourself off from the source. You cut yourself, and the awareness is there, but now it's constricted and limited by the way you think, and the way you think has this awareness that is everything, right? Shut down into this very limited reality that you then begin to experience as you, the person in the physical body. So it's always available. It's always available to experience, but the experience of it is mitigated by the program that's running all the time, right? And you've identified with that program so long, so often, you've been practicing being what you're not so often for so long that you've got to break out of that. That's hypnotic. You've got to break out of that. And that's not an easy thing to do, because what will happen, the thing that confounds the situation is that the you that you think you are thinks it can realize the truth. The you that you think you are thinks it can realize the truth, thinks that it can exist after death. That's the problem with the question. You couldn't answer the question unless there was a you who is interested in trying to exist after the body dies. that's where the question's coming from, right? But that's why I said what I said. If you take that out of the equation, if there's no you that's interested in whether or not you exist after the body dies, then what's left? If there's no you that's interested in life after death, what's left? If you experience what's there, right, the answer to the question is obvious. If there is no body and there never was anybody, right, to have feelings. I mean, after all, what are our emotions? Emotions are the experience of being a separate self, aren't they? Who's happy? I am. Who's you? The person. Who's sad? I am. Who's you? The person. Who's scared? I am. Who's you? The person. If you're not a separate self, how can you be afraid? That's why the Course in Miracles says what it says, right? You know, the truth can't be threatened. What's real cannot be threatened, right? And what's unreal doesn't exist. So if you take what's unreal out of the picture, there's no threat. How can there be a threat? If you're everything happening all the time. Now it's hard for this to be conceived as a separate self, right? But if you're everything happening all the time outside of time, how can there be any threat? So the only thing you really have to do is not try as a person to get the answers to the question that'll satisfy you about your fear, right? No, instead of that, do the practices that will give you direct access to the experience in which there is no fear. That'll resolve it, right? Not like an answer, but like a direct experience. So the bottom line of what I'm saying here is that the practice of meditation is so critical to this transformation, to this transcendence experience. And that's why I keep emphasizing to you, establish a meditation practice. If you do that and you do it the way it's meant to be done and you do it consistently over time, you'll know what I'm talking about because you'll be experiencing it directly. Even those of you who are here who have been doing this consistently, you've got to be starting to see it. You've got to be starting to see it, you know, that your life is a human experience in which you can have the experience of the truth. Because the human life that you're experiencing is a limited version of the reality of what you are. And the reality of what you are is there all along, even when it's presenting itself in a limited way. So, continue to practice meditation. That's the key to this whole thing. And if you understand what I'm talking about, and if you begin to experience it for yourself, you'll have a natural motivation to take it further. Natural motivation to take it further. I found in my own experience, at one point, it was like the reason that when I sat for 1 hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours, right, was simply because I wanted to find out what the experience was. If you sit that long and the mind has enough time to calm down, and you sit that long and you're paying attention the way that you pay attention when you're meditating, right, as awareness, right? What would it be like to do that for 90 minutes? Obviously, it's challenging, right? But my interest in knowing what it would be like, what the experience would be, was stronger than the challenge of doing it, right? And if you look at it that way, and if because you look at it that way, you do it, right? Then you're into the experience of the possibility. That's why people, you know, when I say to people that I go up to Ithaca or I'll go to these other places and do these intensive meditation retreats where you're meditating all day long for 7 days and people say, oh, I could never do that, right? That tells the whole thing. The reason that you can never do that is because the you who's saying that does not yet get what that is. If you got what that is, you would be very interested in doing that, to find out what would it be like? What would it be like for you to spend 7 days not saying anything? To spend 7 days practicing meditation practice most of your waking hours, and then practicing while you're eating, practicing while you're walking, practicing while you're working. Can't you see that would greatly enhance and expand your ability to experience transcendent wisdom and transformation in your everyday life? And if that's the case, wouldn't that be an attractive possibility? You see? But no, that's not the way it's looked at for most people. For most people, it's like, given who I consider myself to be in the life that I'm living, right, I wouldn't do something like that. Because I don't get the payoff, you know? If I could do that and after 7 days they'd say I would be enlightened and they'd be guaranteeing me that in writing, I might consider it. Right? It's like the person who goes to heaven, right? And they get to heaven's gate, right? And they're about to go into heaven and they say, wait a minute, I want to read a book about this first to make sure I want to go here. Or there's another story that Paul Hederman tells about going to heaven, and he goes to heaven and there's St. Peter at the gates, the gates of heaven. And he goes up and St. Peter says, okay, who are you? And he says, oh, I'm Paul, let me in. And St. Peter says, no, you can't come in. Right? And so then eventually, through going through cycles of being rejected from heaven, he eventually comes to the gates of heaven, and St. Peter says, okay, what do you want? And he doesn't say anything, he just walks past him into heaven. Because you see, as long as you're Paul, you can't get into heaven, right? But when you see the truth, you realize that it's a gateless gate, just like they say in Zen. There is no gate to go through. You can just walk in yourself. Same thing is true here. There's no gate, there's nothing, no test you have to pass to be what you already are, right? That's ridiculous, right? But that's what you have to understand, so you stop trying to pass the test.